I'm Shin, and these are the stories we're following at this hour. North Korea's second most powerful official heads home after meeting U.S. President Donald Trump. With not much known about the talks between the two sides, it is unclear whether progress has been made on the regime's denuclearization. Here in South Korea, President Jae-in will hold a summit in Seoul today with Philippines President Rodrigo Duterte. On the agenda, boosting ties in the areas of defense, trade, and people-to-people exchanges. U.S. President Donald Trump's legal team says it would contest any effort to force him to testify before a grand jury as the special counsel continues its probe into Russia's alleged interference in the 2016 presidential election. We begin this morning with the latest on North Korea. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's top aide, Kim Yong-chol, has wrapped up his 4-day trip to the U.S., during which he met with U.S. President Donald Trump. Kim Yong-chol left New York City late Saturday afternoon at local time and arrived in Beijing on Sunday on his way back to Pyongyang. Kim is said to have spent the night at the North's embassy in Beijing and will fly back on Monday. After landing in New York late Wednesday, North Korea's top official held 2 days of meetings with the U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and then flew over to Washington to deliver a personal letter to President Trump from Kim Jong-un, which led to Trump's announcement that the June 12th summit is back on. And back here in the Korean Peninsula, North Korea and the U.S. held a 4th round of working-level talks at the inter-Korean border on Sunday in preparation for their summit set for next Tuesday in Singapore. Our Lee Jae-in tells us more.
The first round of working-level talks between North Korea and the United States began on May 27th, followed by a second meeting 3 days later. On June 2nd, the third round of talks began with Sung Kim, the U.S. ambassador to the Philippines, saying discussions were moving in the right direction, but adding there was still much work to do on nailing down a summit between the leaders of the two sides. And on Sunday, they continued that much-needed work, with Sung Kim and Pyongyang's Vice Foreign Minister Choi Sun-hee holding a 4th round of talks at the border village of Panmunjom. While little is known about the details of the 4th round of talks, observers say the two sides may be fine-tuning the details of the historic summit set for June 12th in Singapore. Despite having 4 rounds of talks, there are still sharp differences between the two countries, especially when it comes to the regime's denuclearization. This comes as South Korea's Unification Minister Cho Myung-gyun said last week that the differences in stances between North Korea and the U.S. remain quite significant. The South Korean minister, however, remains optimistic, saying that while it will not be easy to narrow the gap and find common ground, it would not be impossible either. Will there be more talks between North Korea and the U.S.? For now, it seems the discussions will continue until every detail of the Singapore summit is set on stone. Lee Jae-in, Arirang News.
And South Korea's top negotiator at the 6-party talks will meet his Russian counterpart in Moscow on Tuesday to discuss the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. Seoul's Foreign Ministry says Special Representative for Korean Peninsula Peace and Security Affairs Lee Do-hun and Russia's Deputy Foreign Minister Igor Morgulov will share views on the current diplomatic situation as the historic North Korea-U.S. summit approaches, possibly reflecting on the inter-Korean summit and the Russian foreign minister's visit to Pyongyang. The two will also discuss ways to cooperate in order to achieve denuclearization and lasting peace on the Korean Peninsula. With plans moving forward for that unprecedented summit between the leaders of North Korea and the U.S., the defense chiefs of the regional powers have reaffirmed their strong commitment to military cooperation while calling on Pyongyang to make concrete efforts for its denuclearization. Our Park Ji-won reports from Singapore.
Speaking to reporters before the 3-way talks began, the defense chiefs from South Korea, the U.S. and Japan reaffirmed their commitment to strengthening their military cooperation to achieve the successful denuclearization of North Korea. And they stressed that South Korea, the U.S., and Japan are committed to closely consulting with one another for peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula. South Korea's Defense Minister Song Young-moo urged his American and Japanese counterparts to support the North's decision to open up and join the international community.
Because North Korea has decided to take the path of denuclearization, the three of us need to closely cooperate, more than ever, so that the North can achieve complete denuclearization and not stray from that path.
U.S. Secretary of Defense James Mattis said the U.S. welcomes the prospect of peace and prosperity on the Korean Peninsula, but said the North has to take concrete steps.
North Korea will receive relief only when it demonstrates verifiable and irreversible steps to denuclearization.
Japan's Defense Minister Itsunori Onodera also emphasized the importance of military cooperation among the three, while stressing the necessity of solving the issue of Japanese nationals abducted by the North Korean regime.
We look forward to the upcoming meeting as an opportunity to solve the nuclear issue and the abductee issue.
According to an official statement from South Korea's defense ministry, the three defense chiefs agreed to stay unified while supporting all diplomatic efforts to achieve the complete, verifiable, and irreversible denuclearization of North Korea and to continue implementing related UN Security Council resolutions. The U.S. meanwhile also reaffirmed its ironclad security commitment to its allies in the region. The trilateral talks were held on the sidelines of the annual Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore, which ended its three-day run on Sunday afternoon. And now, in less than 10 days, the leaders of North Korea and the U.S. are due to meet here in Singapore for their historic summit. And the world will be watching whether they can agree on a concrete, peaceful path to the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. Park Ji-won, Arirang News, Singapore.
Now, there seems to have been a major reshuffle among the top brass in North Korea's military, a move that's being seen to tame the armed forces ahead of next week's summit between leader Kim Jong-un and U.S. President Donald Trump. Intelligence sources in South Korea say that No Kwang-chul, the first vice minister of the Ministry of People's Armed Forces, has replaced Park Yong-sik as a defense chief. Lee Myung-soo, the chief of the Korean People's Army's general staff, is said to have been replaced by his own deputy Lee Young-gil. And these changes come after the director of the General Political Bureau of the military was replaced with Pyongyang Mayor Kim Soo-gil, something confirmed by the regime's state-run media last month. Watchers say the reshuffle could be part of the regime's effort to nudge hardliners out of the way ahead of that summit next week, while others say it's part of the regime's strategy to shift the focus from nuclear development to that of the economy. It's been over a month since the leaders of the two Koreas hugged it out during their first summit at the inter-Korean border village of Panmunjom, promising efforts for a more peaceful Korean peninsula. And with that positive mood trickling down to regular people, a special event has been put on to allow South Koreans to buy train tickets from Seoul to Pyongyang. Unfortunately, for now at least, that train had to be stopped short of its stated destination, but it did take passengers right up to the border. Our Ko Ryun-hee tells us more.
A temporary ticket office opened Sunday at Seoul Station, selling tickets to a special destination, Pyongyang. It was an event sponsored by the national railway operator Korail and the Ministry of Unification. Although the train only goes as far as Torasan Station, the northernmost stop on South Korea's Gyeongin Line, it marked the first time an ordinary passenger train has carried a group so far north. Those making the trip expressed hope for the two Koreas to reunify.
I'm very excited today. I hope the day will come when everyone can actually go to Pyongyang and buy their tickets at Seoul Station.
Notable guests were there, including officials like Seoul Mayor Park Won-sun, who emphasized the city's role in bringing peace to the Korean peninsula.
Seoul Station will play a big role in the future. It will be the starting point and the ending point of a Trans-Eurasia Railroad.
More than 500 people got on this train, leaving behind those who unfortunately couldn't get a ticket. Usually, the trip north is on a small sightseeing train with room for fewer than 80 people. But on Sunday, this full-size passenger train was rolled out to make room for hundreds. The hour-and-a-half trip to Torasan Station offered some rarely seen views.
I'm so happy to be taking part in this event. I love the beautiful scenery outside. It's even more meaningful because I'm heading north.
After arriving at the station only 2 kilometers away from the military demarcation line, participants were taken on a short tour. They also enjoyed musical performances dedicated to the reunification of the divided Koreas and to stability and peace on the peninsula. The event's organizers say they'll work to run the trains on a regular basis so more people can make the symbolic trip. 고른이 Arirang News.
And now for a look at stories making headlines around the world, and we start in the United States. Amid a probe into alleged Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election, Donald Trump's lawyer says the president may have the power to pardon himself, but does not plan to do so. For more on this and other news around the world, we turn to our Aram at the News Center. Aram, so Trump's lawyer Rudy Giuliani did downplay that idea, but what does that all mean?
Well, Simon, Rudy Giuliani's comments on Sunday came after a letter was sent to the special counsel Robert Mueller, who is leading the Russia probe. That came from Trump's legal team. It was published by the New York Times over the weekend and states that Trump's lawyers would contest any effort to force the president to testify in front of a grand jury regarding the Russia probe. It also states that the president has the absolute power to terminate the inquiry or even exercise his power to pardon himself if he so desired. Trump's campaign team is being investigated for possible collusion with Moscow to win the 2016 election. Mueller's probe is also looking into whether Trump tried to criminally obstruct the inquiry, especially after he fired his former national security advisor, Michael Flynn, as well as ex-FBI Director James Comey, who was also looking into the case. Both Trump and Russia deny any wrongdoing. Speaking in an NBC interview, Giuliani noted that a self-pardon would have serious political ramifications while insisting Trump's innocence.
The President of the United States pardoning himself would just be unthinkable, and it would lead to probably an immediate impeachment. You know, you get the House, Senate be under tremendous pressure. President Trump has no need to do that. He didn't do anything wrong.
It remains unclear if Trump will pardon himself or if he actually has the power to do so. It has never been attempted by any U.S. president, and the Justice Department under the Nixon administration said it was not allowed. However, others argue that the U.S. Constitution does not explicitly say the president cannot pardon himself or herself, but it also doesn't say that he or she can. In other news, police in Germany have shot an Austrian man said to be, quote, rampaging around Berlin Cathedral with a knife. The 53-year-old, who is yet to be identified, was shot in the leg on Sunday. A police officer was reported to have also been injured. German authorities immediately ruled out any terrorist motive, and witnesses said he was in a confused state and was hurling verbal insults. A new study shows about 70% of women with the most common form of early-stage breast cancer can safely skip chemotherapy without hurting their chances of beating the disease. The study published in the New England Journal of Medicine analyzed how well a widely used genetic test assessed cancer risk based on 21 genes linked with breast cancer recurrence. It found that an intermediate group of patients could bypass post-surgery chemo and be safely treated with just surgery and hormone therapy. Chemotherapy is often used after surgery to help stop breast cancer from spreading or coming back, but side effects range from hair loss to permanent nerve pain. 9 migrants, including 6 children, have drowned in a boat accident off Turkey's Mediterranean coast. 15 migrants were said to be on the boat that capsized on Sunday near the town of Demre in the southern province of Antalya. Meanwhile, at least 35 migrants died and dozens more were rescued in a separate sinking off the coast of Tunisia. More than 1,000 migrants from sub-Saharan Africa and the Middle East have died this year alone trying to cross to Europe for refuge.
South Korean President Moon Jae-in will be hosting President Rodrigo Duterte of the Philippines at the presidential office of Blue House later this Monday. The leaders are set to hold a bilateral summit during which they will discuss strengthening ties in areas such as defense, trade, and people-to-people exchange. President Moon is set to expect to seek a Southeast Asian country's support for his new Southern policy, which aims for more economic cooperation and exchange between South Korea and the members of the ASEAN countries. He will also seek Duterte's endorsement for peace settlement on the Korean Peninsula ahead of the North Korea-U.S. summit next week. President Moon and Duterte will then hold a joint media conference, which will be followed by a banquet hosted by South Korea's first couple. The Moon-Duterte summit will be the second of its kind after their first in November last year, which took place on the sidelines of the ASEAN summit in Manila. And now to the economy. Food prices in South Korea have yet to recover from the aftermath of a cold snap last winter that caused the prices of vegetables to soar. The OECD says Korea's food prices were up nearly 3% in April compared to the same period last year, making them the 10th highest among OECD member nations. Now, that is the big jump from January this year when Korea ranked 30th. Data from Statistics Korea show vegetable prices rose by 13.5% on year in May, and the prices of potatoes in particular rose by nearly 60% during that same period. Prices of Korea's staple grain, rice, also jumped by 29.5% on year. Finance ministers of the world's 7 wealthiest nations gathered for a meeting in Canada over the weekend. 6 countries, excluding the U.S., denounced the recent decision by the Trump administration to impose tariffs on steel and aluminum. The U.S. Treasury Secretary at the meeting stressed the need for a fair and balanced trade. Our Oh Jung-hee reports.
Countries of the G7 minus the U.S. have criticized Washington over its recent decision to impose tariffs on steel and aluminum. Meeting in Whistler, Canada for a group of 7 finance ministers meeting, top officials from Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, and the United Kingdom issued a joint statement expressing, quote, unanimous concern and disappointment. And they asked the U.S. Treasury Secretary to convey that to President Trump. This in regards to Washington's decision to impose a 25% tariff on steel imports and 10% tariff on aluminum imports from the EU, Canada, and Mexico.
The Americans have decided to, in our mind, take an action that's not at all constructive. It's actually destructive to our ability to get things done around tariffs on steel and aluminum.
In the joint statement, the 6 finance ministers called for decisive action from the U.S., adding that their goal is to convince the U.S. to move back from these tariffs. Each country also has plans to retaliate.
I can say that we've already demonstrated our willingness to retaliate. We were prepared, we were ready to move forward because we knew that this was at least one potential outcome.
U.S. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin, who was the prime target of criticism at the meeting, held a separate press conference and said the U.S. wants to ensure fair and balanced trade. He claimed the meeting was not at all a G6+1 meeting like many have said it was.
Our objective is to make sure we have fair and balanced trade, and that's really what we're focused on. I don't think in any way the U.S. is abandoning its leadership in the global economy. No, I think this was the G7. Anybody who made the comment, I think there was a comment out there that the G6+1, it was not. It's the G7. We believe in the G7. It's an important group.
Just before the G7 summit ended, Trump tweeted that the U.S. cannot tolerate unfair trade anymore and that it's been ripped off by other countries for years. 오정희, Arirang News.
The third hearing in former President Lee Myungbaks' corruption trial is to begin at around now at the Seoul Central District Court. The scandal-ridden ex-leader has shown up today after the court said it could not proceed with the trial unless the defendant is there in person. The former president skipped the second hearing, citing poor health, and had requested the trial be held without him having to be present. The former President Lee, who was president from 2008 to 2013, faces 16 corruption-related charges, including bribery, abuse of power, embezzlement, and tax evasion. South Korea has been offering official development assistance to developing countries around the world for a number of years now. Now, the latest country to benefit from that aid program is the Democratic Republic of the Congo, which is seeking guidance in preserving its heritage. Kan Hyung-woo with the details.
The Korea Cultural Heritage Foundation has put together a cultural workshop for government officials from the Democratic Republic of the Congo. DR Congo is building a new national museum because the old one was small, in poor condition, and not easily accessible. But even a brand new museum cannot guarantee the preservation of the country's heritage. The main message of the seminar is improving overall awareness and expertise in modern museums, and it seems to have been well received after the 20-day training session.
Through these 3 weeks of training, I was able to improve my expertise in culture as a whole and learned a lot about how to preserve and manage a country's cultural heritage.
The participants went to visit the National Museum of Korea, the Jeonguk Prehistory Museum, and a number of other advanced museums in South Korea to get an idea of how to preserve their own heritage. In addition to the museums, the Congolese officials learned about other ways the South Korean government works to preserve the country's cultural legacy.
I explained the administrative system of protecting Korea's cultural assets. I also told them how Korea is utilizing this system in education and for tourism.
Having completed the workshop, the officials will return to the Democratic Republic of the Congo to implement what they've learned. Kan Hyung-woo, Arirang News.
The South Korean national football team has arrived in Austria for its pre-World Cup training camp, with their first group match that is against Sweden, now less than just 2 weeks away. The 23-member squad, led by the head coach Shin Tae-yong, will stay in Salzburg and play 2 more tune-up matches before flying to St. Petersburg on June 12th. Drawn in Group F, the 61st ranked South Korea will play Sweden on June 17th, Mexico on the 22nd, and their final group match against Germany on the 27th. South Korea will be playing in their 9th consecutive World Cup, but will be the underdogs in all of their group matches.
Good morning. Many regions had a blistering first weekend of June, leaving us wondering how hot July and August will be. So a heat wave advisory was issued in some southern regions yesterday. Well, now all the heat wave alerts have been lifted, but it's still going to be quite warm in the afternoon under partly sunny skies. And highs will be a couple degrees lower than yesterday. Seoul will top out at 27 degrees Celsius. Daegu and Daejeon at 30 degrees. Gyeongju will be topping out at 31 degrees this afternoon. And warm and sunny weather will continue with no rain in the forecast here in the capital. With that, let's take a look at the international weather for viewers around the world. So South Korea will see the early summer heat wave ease a bit this afternoon. And North Korea will see partly cloudy skies with warm daily highs. Beijing is also dealing with searing heat. It's going to hit its peak tomorrow at 41 degrees, so wait until Thursday to see temperatures come down. Sydney siders, take out the wet weather gear. It's forecast to rain until Wednesday. Over in Canada, more rain is in the forecast for Montreal as a series of low-pressure systems will affect the area into 2 states along with cooler temperatures. As for South America, Rio de Janeiro and Buenos Aires will have a wet start to the work week. Taking you to Europe, Rome looks to have a warm and sunny work week. Lastly, to Africa, most cities on the map will be under sunny skies, except Addis Ababa with scattered thunderstorms. And that's the weather update for now.
And that'll do it for us at the hour on Arirang News. Thanks as always for watching and have a great start of your day and the week ahead.